sexy on secular sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality. I am the La Bianca, with me as always.
Howdy, I'm Christy Powell.
And today we are welcoming Chrissy Stroop. Chrissy is a prominent voice in the online Exvangelical community and the creator of some hashtags that many of you may be familiar with, including hashtag Expose Christian Schools and hashtag Empty the Pews. She's been mentioned in the Economist, the New York Times, and the Associated Press, and has published in Foreign Policy and Playboy, just to name a few. She now lives in Portland, Oregon, and works as a senior researcher at the Postsecular Conflicts project at the University of Innsbruck. This year has been especially exciting for Chrissy. She came out as trans, moved to Portland, and just this week had her book, Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church, published on December 1st. Congratulations, Chrissy, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, the Triple Crown.
Right?
Right, real the trifecta there. Well, thanks V for that great introduction.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh. So we are going to jump right in to this interview. But if you are listening or watching, you can call in and talk to us, and we'll answer any questions you've got about sex or secularism. And that number is 512-686-0279. That's 512-686-0279. All right. So, Chrissy, tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know that you are a big part of the ex-evangelical community. And tell us what that label means to you and kind of how you grew up and what that process was like.
Sure. So the way that most people use the term evangelical refers to, right-wing, mostly white, born-again Christians. So when sociologists use that term for Pew Research or PRI, that's pretty much what they mean. They distinguish white evangelicals from Black Protestants because obviously very different histories there and very different politics of those churches. So that's the kind of subculture that I grew up in, and that includes a lot of different denominations. I'm not sure anybody even knows exactly how many, but it's usually defined more around certain cultural and theological things. So evangelicals tend to put a high emphasis on either biblical inerrancy or even literalism, or at least biblicism. They have a high standard for biblical authority. Of course, they pick and choose, like everybody picks and chooses. There can't be a consistent literalism of the Bible, but they think there can be. And the most important thing about it is to hate queer people and women. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I grew up in different kinds of churches. Like when I was born, we went to a missionary church, then we went to a Baptist church and a Wesleyan church, and then we ended up in an independent Christian church, which is one branch of the Restoration movement. Mm-hmm. And then we finally it was technically another missionary church, but we moved to Colorado Springs to do a church plant with this whole kind of seemingly new, it started in the 1970s, but I think it was really picking up in the 90s, mega church inspired, hip, cool evangelical church, non-denominational or non-denominational-ish.
Yep.
And, if my parents are going to be switching churches that many times, they obviously don't care that much about whether you're a Calvinist or an Arminian. They think there are some things that are indeed unclear in the Bible, and God doesn't make everything perfectly clear to us. So there are some things we can disagree on, but as long as, we all try to ban abortion and stop the advance of LGBTQ rights together and generally hold up white supremacist patriarchy, we're all good Christians, and we'll say we believe in Jesus and all that stuff. So yeah, they put an emphasis on biblical authority and conversion, which is super annoying.
Mm-hmm. So if that's I love that definition, and thank you for that clarification, because I do think a lot of the time, and this is something I was kind of guilty of doing when I first started talking about Christianity and especially evangelicism, because that's also my background. I would just say Christians, as a whole,
right?
As I was making this generalization, and I realized more and more I was interacting with different kinds of Christians that while I don't agree with any of them on the main tenets of their religion, there are definitely subsections that I have more of a problem problem with. And evangelicalism is that category that I tend to combat the most.
Sure. Like when my girlfriend talks about how she also grew up Christian, there's a big part of me that's like, oh, sweetie. But like, did you though? Because if you haven't gone to church in a barn or in a high school gymnasium or in what looks to be like a concert amphitheater, I don't know that you've gotten the entire experience of being a evangelical.
Mm-hmm.
She would totally have been left behind in the rapture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not saying that you weren't saved, it's just you definitely would have had to endure the apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about these kind of complex text-based and tradition-based religions, right? So there's all different kinds of communities that interpret them in different ways. There's always an element of communal mediation. Mm-hmm. It's almost more correct to speak of there being Christianities when you're talking of a faith with so many branches, maybe 30 or 40,000, based on one estimate I recently saw. Rather than just one Christianity. So, if your girlfriend grew up like in a nice sort of liberal mainline denomination or liberal-ish, like, they would probably look at evangelicals and fundamentalists and think, well, they're the ones who are not real Christians because they're not following Jesus' teachings about helping the poor or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, and then it's the other way around. Like, well, they're not real Christians because they can be gay and think that's okay. And also, we do help the poor. We just don't want the state to do it.
Right. Right. So if we're doing if we're categorizing evangelical in that very specific way, how then do you categorize?
Sorry, my foot fell asleep. Sorry.
Oh, can't have that. What would an ex-evangelical be then? Is that a kind of person? Because I know the interesting thing about ex-evangelical, the community online at least, is that it does include both people who have deconverted completely and are now identify as either agnostic or atheist, but also people who move to a more progressive, liberal version of Christianity. So what are some of the common denominators of that community, do you think?
Mm-hmm. I would say that, most people who identify with that term in some way, ex-evangelical, ex-V, or ex-evangelical, they have experienced some kind of hurt and trauma. I mean, to be honest, evangelicalism, it's a kind of fundamentalism, and all fundamentalisms are abusive. So even if you're not a victim of child sex abuse in this situation, there's at least like low-grade spiritual abuse and manipulation going on all the time. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes more intensely than others. There's an expectation of absolute conformity. There's strict patriarchy. It's very fiercely policed and enforced. And so there's really no room to be different from, this heteronormative sort of white middle-class ideal. So people lived that, and people who left it, usually with some kind of trauma or pain to work through, often identify now with that term because we've kind of all started talking to each other and comparing notes, particularly since 2016. I mean, it's not like there weren't people who had left before, but we've seen every time that we do a new hashtag campaign, how many people say, oh, I thought I was the only one. Mm-hmm. Like when we did hashtag rapture anxiety. Like, oh, I thought I was the only one who was traumatized by A Thief in the Night and A Distant Thunder, like these stupid rapture and tribulation movies from the 1970s.
Oh my goodness.
And I mean, they're really bad production quality, but they are terrible to show to kids, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, it's terrifying. I've talked about it. Like, there was a point in time where I couldn't be behind a closed door. Like, I would not close any doors because I thought if I opened them, everyone would be gone. So yeah, it's very real.
Yeah, we definitely grew up in that generation of Tim LaHaye and Barry Jenkins and the Left Behind, and I mean, major motion pictures. It got mainstream attention in a way that I don't think it had seen in the 70s or really ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the books certainly did. I don't know so much if the movie. I mean, I guess they kind of made.
I mean, the films got traction because the books were so huge.
They got a remake with Nicolas Cage, but let's be honest, he's not exactly A-list anymore.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, the original was with Kirk Cameron. Like, he hasn't been A-list for like 30 or 40 years. So,
I was gonna say poor Kirk, but then I was like, never mind.
No,
I hate that smarmy little shit. Did you see his whole video when he was leaving Florida before Hurricane Irma, and he was like reading from, what was it? was it from the book of Job? And he was basically saying like hurricanes like
no.
this show God's power as he's getting on one of the last flights out of Florida.
Right, seriously.
Oh my God. I didn't see that, but that's
Coach,
I was
I'm
in
sure.
Florida for Irma. I lost power for about 48 hours. And I mean, I was lucky that I didn't lose it for more than that.
Oh my gosh. So as we're talking about kind of how you grew up in the evangelical community and what ex-evangelicalism kind of looks like now, how does that pertain to bodies? Because the conversation we're having tonight is going to focus around both the protection and the celebration of bodies, both of which don't happen in the church very often. So what were you taught about your body or about bodies in general as a kid growing up in this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I think one of the other things, commonalities, particularly among women and queer people in ex-evangelical spaces, is this real emphasis on body positivity, because we have to unlearn hatred of our bodies. And I mean, sometimes men too. I mean, men are also affected by purity culture growing up in this, some more than others. Women are disproportionately harmed by it, and queer people are disproportionately harmed by it, but everybody's harmed by it. I mean, if you're a straight guy and you're actually scrupulous and conscientious, and it's the scrupulous and conscientious people who are trying to be the best Christians they can be who are most likely to end up on the other side, really, burned and traumatized and trying to figure out what happened. I've certainly known straight men who are also really damaged by purity culture. So I don't want to say it's, that they can't be, or I don't want to have stupid arguments about like, who has the worst pain, because those are just never really
Right. Oppression Olympics don't get us.
useful. But yeah, so one of the emphases I would say is body positivity. And when you talk about, people going to different places from evangelicalism, that's something that a lot of us have emphasized, that we should just be building bridges across those divides, because we do have a lot in common. We do have a lot of things to explore, sometimes collectively in a way that could help each other with healing, obviously not as a replacement for therapy. You have to watch out for trauma bonding, but that can certainly help. Also, when we speak with a collective voice, like for example, in hashtag campaigns like Expose Christian Schools, we can get media attention. And what I've been really trying to do is channel things like that to help change the national conversation around religion, because it's really taboo to criticize, particularly Christianity, any large Christian group. Evangelicals have great PR. They're very PR savvy. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of friends in the press. And, by just railing against religion and just like a really flippant and frankly ignorant way, like Richard Dawkins, you're not going to make any progress changing the national conversation. You might feel good about yourself and pat yourself on the back, like, oh, I'm so much smarter than believers, which is not true, by the way. But intelligence has nothing to do with it.
Right.
So yeah, some are Wiccans now, some are in more liberal branches of Christianity. And, I have my thoughts, and if asked or pressed, I'll tell you, I think organized religion probably on the upshot does significantly more harm than good, at least at this point in human history. But I don't have to rub that in people's faces all the time. And I can just accept people who are different than me, which is, something that you can't do precisely in that kind of conservative religious background. And it's great to break away from that. But yeah, when it comes to bodies, my parents, my mom in particular, they taught us euphemisms, like we weren't like allowed to say like the real words. We couldn't even say but
and vajayjay. Ding dong.
Yeah, the medical terms like that.
Medical terms, right.
I mean, far from vagina or vulva, like we literally said front bottom, like holy shit, like how stupid is that?
I've heard that before, and it's sent chills down my spine every time.
Everything about that just feels very uncomfortable to me.
And corporal punishment is heavily emphasized in evangelical subculture. I didn't get the worst of any of this stuff. Like the worst my sister and I got was we were spanked with a wooden spoon. But we had some of that language around of children's wills needing to be broken, which is just so abusive. And they take that out on the body. And, we know from studies of trauma that the body remembers these things. And, this is how you generate cycles of abuse and create authoritarian personalities to carry on the authoritarian communities in the future. So it's hard to break these cycles, these things that live in your body and the thought patterns. I will say for my parents that they did tell us that if, any adults ever tried to touch our private parts, that's the term they used, or anything like that, we should tell them. So that's a lot better than a lot of people get.
Sure.
In evangelical subculture. Now the sex talk, on the other hand, was really pathetic. And it involved a James Dobson book.
Oh, no.
It's a great place to start for anything having to do with sex.
Preparing for adolescence.
Oh, gosh.
Not his worst book, because he actually says in there that don't feel so guilty about masturbation. Just make it purely mechanical and don't fantasize, because you can totally do that, right? But so he sets you up with some guilt there, but again, it's it could be worse. It could be don't.
Gosh.
Prepares you for a lifetime
at all.
of mechanical sex.
Right.
But seriously, I thought that I had blasphemed the Holy Spirit when I was in high school, 10th or 11th grade, I think, because I thought, even though James Dobson thought it was okay to masturbate purely mechanically if you don't have any sexual thoughts or fantasies at the same time, because that's a thing. But I promised God, because I was going to be super pious, that I was going to stop masturbating entirely. And then when I failed, I thought I was going to hell, and I had this palpable lump of anxiety in my chest for a week. It was terrible. And I had, some Christian school teachers and pastors and people try to talk me down from that. And basically they all pretty much said, well, if you want to repent, that means you can repent. Because if you've really committed the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, then you don't want to repent. The Holy Spirit, God just turns you over to the devil.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So, there was that. And there was also, for me, repressed and unrecognized queerness. It created some weird I don't need to go into all the details, but fetishes and paraphilia, I guess, for me, that I had to figure out what's going on there. And then eventually, it took me into my 30s to learn enough gender theory to realize that oh, that's why I felt weird and uncomfortable in my own skin and just off somehow and different for my whole life, and why I'm not comfortable in really masculine spaces, and why I hated it when my parents and grandparents forced me to get my hair cut, and all kinds of things like that, because I am and always have been attracted to girls, to women. I thought that I was just a weird straight guy, I figured that's what I had to be. And then but as I started to open up more, and it really came kind of toward the end of my deconstruction, that I had a lot of these revelations, I realized that I can also be attracted to men as well. So, that was interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I became a very cerebral kid, so cerebral that after doing 2 mission trips to Russia, I ended up not just going through college, but going to grad school to get a PhD in modern Russian history. And, that shiny Stanford diploma and $1 will get me a pack of gum these days. But I have a PhD from Stanford University. No, I do kind of use it. Well, you said I work for Postsecular Conflicts. It's kind of more accurate to say that yes, I have an affiliation with them and I do some things with that affiliation, but I don't. Most of my work is not that. Most of my work is freelance writing and advocacy and doing some public speaking and that sorts of things. So I've been doing much more of this kind of social justice, sexuality and gender, ex-evangelical kind of stuff lately than I've been doing Russian history stuff.
That's
but
right.
yeah, I am still a senior researcher.
So you kind of brought up the next thing I was going to ask, which is, I know for me, a lot of people assume that I left Christianity when I discovered that I was queer. And that I realized that, oh, I'm queer and I can't be Christian anymore, so I'm going to leave, and that was my motivation for deconverting.
Sure.
that actually, it was flipped. I didn't even start thinking about my identity and who I was as an individual and as a body until after I had already gone through most of that deconstruction process. So can I ask when that started for you? Was it simultaneous? Did one come before the other? How did that kind of fall into play?
Yeah. So, I mean, the long story short is that it was kind of reversed for me as well. But then to go into a little more detail, I mean, I talked about how I just became a very cerebral kid who lived in my head because there were things going on with me that I didn't know, what they were, and I couldn't name them and I couldn't sort them out. And I didn't get, proper counseling. I was taken to like a counselor when I was, I think, 6 years old because I had like too vivid of an imaginary friend or something. But
oh no, not too vivid of an imaginary friend. What is that like?
How could God possibly love somebody who believes in imaginary friends? Very problematic.
But there was like no follow-up. So all I just knew is that like I always felt different somehow. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I did start associating that more like in my teenage years, maybe a little before, with also just like, not getting close to a lot of guys, not feeling super comfortable, sometimes feeling very uncomfortable in masculine spaces, particularly when you're expected to just like go along with like growing misogyny or that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. But I think intellectually, around the time I was 16 years old is when I first started really deconstructing. When it comes to bodies, I mean, I do remember one moment prior to that when I felt really, really uncomfortable and felt like something was not right. And that was when my entire 7th grade class at Colorado Springs Christian Middle School was taken on a day for a retreat where they spent the whole day basically fear-mongering and giving us hashtag Christian alt facts about, sex, and telling us things like you have to keep yourself pure for your future spouse. So don't do anything with a boyfriend or girlfriend that you wouldn't do with somebody else's wife or husband, because you're probably not going to marry them. And therefore you would be cheating on their future spouse and on your future spouse.
Yep.
So lots of guilt, lots of like, oh, condoms never stop AIDS. They can't stop it at all. So many diseases, much pregnancy, very scare. So then at the end of all that, they asked us if we would prayerfully consider signing a purity pledge and only sign it if we really were sure that we could commit to God that we would stay pure until marriage. And they were playing like, manipulative, emotional music. At least that's how I remember it in my head. I'm pretty sure they were.
Only sign it if you're willing to commit, but like make sure to commit and sign it before you leave.
Yeah, we didn't know. I mean, honestly, we didn't know if we were going to be expelled if we didn't sign it.
Yeah.
So everybody signed it. You sat there for a few minutes and they were like, okay, I won't have sex till I'm married. Sure. I mean, I had a lot of guilt and shame at that time anyway, but that made me uncomfortable. I started to get a sense of there's a lot of manipulation going on here, I think. Mm-hmm. But yeah, then when I was 16 and I read the entire Bible through for the first time, I was like, wait a minute. I was always told this was perfectly inerrant and there are no contradictions here, but I see some contradictions. And so I went to talk to our pastor, who was then also a Bible teacher at our school. And this pastor, he said some real doozies from the pulpit. Like once he said that a good Muslim should want to kill Christians and Jews because that's what the Quran tells them to do.
Okay.
And another time he was like, if there is no God, the only question really worth debating is whether or not we should kill ourselves. And he was total
variations of that one before. Yeah.
Well, he was just, paraphrasing Dostoevsky, but of course he didn't cite his sources. But I know that now. He had like a doctorate of theology from some Bible college, and we all thought he was like super intellectual. So, so I went to talk to him. Oh, also he believed in literal demons. Like he thought he'd seen demons, and he and his family spent Halloween praying against demons. And so yeah, I went to talk to him about my doubts. And he gave me an apologetics book to read. I don't remember exactly which one it was. It wasn't one of the really famous ones. It wasn't Lee Strobel or Josh McDowell. Okay. It was in question and answer format. And so I read it through, and I still thought like these answers were a little too glib. They didn't really fully answer my questions. So I went back and told him that I was still doubting. And then the problem was with me. He said, I must be harboring sin in my life. Yeah. So then like the serious spiritual abuse starts. I must be harboring sin in my life. I'm doing something that is opening me up to demonic influences. I'm possibly demonized. He did that like Protestant quasi-exorcism, which is like both tacky and terrible. Like it's the worst of both worlds, because at least a Catholic exorcism is, it's like got a lot of drama to it, and like a lot of
circumstance.
cool
There's
props,
ritual, and there's a sense of completion to it. Yeah.
I mean, okay, I shouldn't be too flippant. People actually die during Catholic exorcisms, and I don't think people usually die during Protestant exorcisms. Although it's not entirely true. They definitely do die during like Pentecostal ones.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have been murdered by Pentecostals in exorcism. So,
Well,
yeah.
That's really a question that's been kind of nagging at me during this conversation. In that original definition of evangelicalism, you didn't talk at all about the experiential aspects. And I'm curious if that is more than just my experience growing up, if that's something that is at least somewhat universal, these ideas of, the Spirit moving within you and listening to the Spirit as it pulls you one way or the other, speaking in tongues, having visions, and these kinds of things, attributing all of your doubts or sinful thoughts to Satan or to some demon that's trying to tempt you. And
we had some of those things. We had the demons. I think a lot of people had the demons after Frank Peretti's books became so popular, right? So then everything was spiritual warfare from circa 1985, and even before, because there was what was that called, like Satanism in the Toy Box or something? That's not exactly
the Satanic Panic.
Yeah, that's not exactly the title of the book, but there's a book like that like has like Yoda and I think maybe He-Man and things on the cover, and it's like, are you giving your kids these things that are opening them up to demonic influences? Yeah. We were not allowed to watch He-Man because he said, "I have the power," and that was bad. And he got his power from a magic sword and not from God.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the original Pokemon theme song had that line about, the power that's inside, and that was enough for my parents to get it banned from the entire school.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was very popular in middle school.
We couldn't watch Bewitched. We watched a lot of like old-timey, wholesome sitcoms, but not Bewitched.
Back when America was great.
Yeah. Back when America
we did watch I Dream of Jeannie because somehow that was okay.
It didn't have the word witch in it. Genie is less scary.
But arguably a djinn is like a kind of demon or like demi-demon or something. So
right.
Anyway.
Just don't go beneath the surface at all.
No, like they're never consistent. That's confusing too. But so no, we didn't do speaking in tongues in my family. But the charismatic practices started becoming more common and more accepted. And then, like Ted Haggard, who's charismatic, like he became head of the National Association of Evangelicals during the George W. Bush years. And so that, I think, was kind of like the triumph of Pentecostalism becoming respectable enough to count as evangelical and not just fundamentalist. And there was like this merging that was happening. Like I was talking about, how denominational affiliation didn't mean much to my parents or to many people in my environment. It meant some to some. You always have some of those nerds who are like, oh yeah, sound doctrine is the most important thing. And that definitely means you have to have you have to have foot washing with the Lord's Supper, and you have to break bread across the table. And anyway, so yeah, no, not the speaking in tongues, but trying to listen to the Spirit, watching out for demons. Yes.
Well, I just wonder what that does to people's relationship with their body. We hear all the time about how homosexuality must be a sin because people are disgusted by it. And I hate to even bring all of this up, but I hear that over and over and over where people say that like, oh, it grosses me out. It doesn't sit with me right. And
because I have a direct line to God, that's God telling me it's not.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it couldn't possibly be their socialization or their hatred of themselves or their deep-seated fear of human sexuality.
Right. Even the concept of being able to be invaded by demons into your body, or the Holy Spirit hot. Being able to that's fair.
Yeah.
That is fair.
Succubus porn's a thing for a reason, but that's a different episode.
Hey, it could be this episode. We could throw the script out and just talk about that. I'd be fine. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So you said that you had started the deconstruction process by the time you were 16, and you were starting to ask questions and stuff like that. So once the questioning with your pastor didn't go anywhere, what was the next step? How long did it take before you were like, okay, this is not me anymore?
A very long time. I smashed an Our Lady Peace CD I smashed like some like traditional Beijing opera masks that my grandma had sent me. Like, this is so terrible. Because they might like be, what am I looking for? Like, not channels, what's vessels of demonic influence, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, I tried to hold on. I was basically in a protracted crisis of faith for a long time after that. It was very painful because typical oldest child, I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to be rebellious. Yeah,
Yep.
hi, Mom. So I tried really hard to hold on. Hotel where we stayed on the mission field. Like, for most of my adult life, I used to tell people who asked how I got into Russian studies that I participated in an international program between high school and college where I volunteered as a tutor, an English tutor in a summer camp environment in rural Russia, which is strictly speaking sort of true. But they didn't train us in how to teach anybody any English. We also had to share our testimonies, which I always hated doing. And yeah, I mean, it's not exactly like getting the Holy Ghost as they understand it in Pentecostalism, but you do have to have experienced some kind of transformation. You have to have a narrative of that. And it's so hard for kids to grow up in it, to like prove that they're really saved. So they're like, oh yeah, I lied to my mom when I was 3.
Yeah.
And then after I prayed the prayer when I was 3.5, I never lied to my mom again.
That's how that works.
So yeah, I mean, we also used English translations of Bible passages for our tutoring, which was like ridiculous and not a pedagogically sound method. And there's a lot of other bullshit, which you can read about in my contribution to Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church. I don't even know how many times I rededicated my life to Christ. Like, that's another thing, right? Like, you go down to the altar call and you probably believe that, you know, you can't lose your salvation, or at least it's really hard to lose your salvation. But, you know, sometimes you backslide, you fall away, and you have to rededicate your life to Christ and get on fire for God again. And so I was like, well, maybe if I do this mission trip again, just like my doubts will go away and I'll be a good Christian.
Yeah. It's a cycle because you never don't feel guilty at some point. So you have to go seek that absolution and that catharsis, and that sustains you for maybe a week. And then by the time Sunday rolls around again, you're like, fuck, I did it again.
Well, it's again this experiential thing that is dysregulating our relationship with our body when we are looking for that rush of emotion, looking for that catharsis, which it can be a drug. I mean, it can get you high and be something that looks like addiction when you're struggling, waiting for that feeling.
Yeah, the way they do it, I mean, it's extremely unhealthy. And so anyway, you know, this all kind of continued with me trying to sort of hold on through like my first partnered sexual experiences, which it happened later than for a lot of people, and which I had a lot of guilt and shame attached to, you know, and through into grad school when being in a very unhealthy place where like I had basically deconstructed my faith, but I was still caught in a lot of the mentality of it.
Right.
You know, and my sister who married at 19 and my cousins, like they were all like married and having children and they're younger than me. And I'm like, life is passing me by and what am I going to do? I have to get married. And so like, I really had a hard time. Like I was kind of faking it to try to stay with any kind of Christianity at that time. But I was then kind of in a really unhealthy way looking for marriage to be like a sort of secular salvation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I ended up in a really like stupid situation where I sort of thought I was going to save myself by saving someone else and got stuck in it for 4 years. And it was not a healthy marriage at all. And so that was distracting for 4 years. And, you know, then I'm also like trying to get tenure track job and not getting anywhere. So, and after getting out of my marriage, I mean, I didn't date really much at all or anything. So I'm just still kind of like trying to get by and get to the next step where like I'll have some breathing space to figure myself out,
Mm-hmm.
And then I end up taking a teaching job at a Russian university in Moscow that used to do the Stanford and Moscow study abroad program, which is now defunct. And I'm not sure if they have a new way to study in Russia at this point, because Russian-American relations have declined precipitously since 2014 in particular, but even a bit before. So really kind of since Putin's third term. I was there in Russia for all that. That was really weird.
Wow.
When Crimea was annexed and there were all the sanctions and counter sanctions and capital flight, and because like Russia sanctioned the EU, but really it was like kind of a sanction on the Russian population because we stopped being able to get like good European cheese and stuff. My ruble denominated salary plummeted. I was deleveraging from debt in dollars, but I was trying to, and that was really a problem. The university did give me a 20% raise, which was the most they could do, which was really nice of them, but it didn't like make up for how much the ruble had been devalued. Mm-hmm. And I also like didn't do exchanges at quite the right times, so it wasn't great. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting to live through Russia through all that, and I was doing a little bit of dating. So mostly, I mean, I was in the same relationship with someone for a couple of years, and it also wasn't a healthy relationship. And I mean, this person even hit me once, and then like I still didn't break up with her. And but only, I mean, well, I don't want to say only once, like once is enough.
Right.
Yeah. She was also like working on herself. I mean, I think that she's become a better person, but well, yeah, I just want to say more about that, I suppose.
That's fair. I think we do have a caller on the line, which is a good puncture between interview block 1 and 2. So if you want to...
It is a great opportunity for us to talk with Nicholas. Nicholas, you're on the air. What can we do for you tonight?
Hello. So I wanted to talk about, well, it's probably on the call screen for you, but being... I want to say like a victim because that sounds like the wrong word, but being like intensely affected by like internalized homophobia.
Sure.
From like being around so many extremely homophobic and extremely religious people like almost my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I live in California, but like I live in Southern California, which is known for being extremely like accepting, but like the area I live in is just bad. And there's so many like evangelical Christians and extremely, extremely religious people that say just absolutely horrible things constantly. Like I'm in college and in between my classes, I used to like sit at this one bakery before I could drive, and I would hear people just talking openly about like, yeah, the gays need to go and get fixed and stuff like that, which is extremely uncomfortable. It's not fun. There's like women in my ceramics class who talk about like, oh yeah, I remember back in my day when we used to beat the gays with baseball bats and stuff. And I was like, let's not talk about that.
Sure.
It was not a fun time to be around. But like, I hear such negative things constantly, all the time. Like,
what kind of steps have you been taking to deconstruct that and to heal from those experiences?
Well, it's like, I don't know, because I know being gay isn't a bad thing. It's just not. Mm-hmm. It's just how it is. Mm-hmm. It's just a human thing, and it's just like weird hearing the same thing constantly, even though like I know it's not true, but it's like always being drilled into me. And there's like people who don't know I'm gay that'll say like all these different horrible things to me, and I'll be like, yep, okay. And it's just like, wow, if this person really knew this stuff about me, they would absolutely hate me. And it's weird just thinking like how different I am than these people think I am. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you have anybody that you can talk to about this who's safe and affirming? Because that can make a huge difference.
My parents and my siblings, and my boyfriend, of course, like, but like, it's, I don't know, my mom recently, in the past, like, couple of years, has gotten a lot more religious. My dad's gotten even more into, like, atheist discussions and stuff. Like, he's been an atheist my whole life, but, like, gotten more into atheist community of Austin stuff, shows like this.
Good for him.
I don't know, it's good. We listen to a lot of the shows a lot. I actually called into Truth Wanted the other day, so that was good.
Oh, fun.
But it's like, I don't know how to, because like, after having something drilled into you constantly for like your entire life, even if you know it's not true, it's still like weird.
Yeah, it's a really challenging thing, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with. The good news is there are a lot of things that can be helpful. You know, I'm not going to say that there is a cure-all, and I definitely want to validate those experiences, how hurtful that is, and how insidious and lasting it can be. I mean, these types of thought patterns can take years and years, a lifetime even, to really deprogram. At the same time, there are things that you can be doing and things that you can be working on to find a lot of relief. And so I hope that you are kind of investigating and just staying curious about those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing that I have sometimes said is that it can take a long time, you know, after being programmed like this or being around this kind of language, or with similar things, or there are parallels with fear of hell, for example. It can just take a long time for your emotions to catch up to your mind, because trauma really does live in the body. Recognizing it, naming it, is the first step, you know, to finding your way past it.
Yeah, it's like, most of it isn't like, oh, I think I'm a bad person, because like, I know I'm not, and stuff like that. But like, most of it is knowing people that are close to me that like do know I'm gay, but say like, do the other thing, like, oh, you're not like the rest of them. And that's just such an uncomfortable thing to hear. It's
It is.
What do you mean, the rest of them? That's so dehumanizing.
Yeah, is the rest of them my boyfriend? Is the rest of them my future boyfriend, or my ex-boyfriend, or my friends that I go out to clubs with, or the bars that I go to, or the books that I read, the movies that I watch? I mean,
and frankly, you know, bigots love to have tokens, right? That they can use to say, oh, look, I'm not a bigot. So Milo Yiannopoulos and his whole relationship with Breitbart, right?
Yeah.
You know, he throws the entire rest of the queer community under the bus. But he has good friends and makes money from it, you know?
Yeah.
Another thing to think about, though, is the fact that a lot of them could have also, if this is a town where everybody thinks this way and you hear this so often, these people are also victims of that same mentality and those same messages. So even just knowing you as a person and seeing that you are defying these crazy stereotypes that they've been fed can potentially help people to be a little bit more accepting in the long run. Not that that's on you, not that that's an emotional, requirement for you to carry, but it is helpful to think. I know a lot of people in my life had no idea what a bisexual person was or what an atheist person was until I came out to them, and then they were like, "Oh, okay, I guess that I'm kind of wrong about everybody." Yeah. So it's
I specifically try and do that. Like, I try and not act like a certain way that like most people think of, like, oh, this is a trademark gay man. This is what they act like. I specifically say, like, I'm never going to act like this because I don't want people like that seem to be like, oh, well, this is a bad person or something like that. It's like, and it's not just religious people like being horribly like violent and stuff. It's also like a bunch, like when I was going to high school, a bunch of girls who were like super fetishizing of gay men, like
Right.
taking pictures of my boyfriend and I just sitting down and
Oh
stuff.
my
And I was like,
God.
please stop. That's so creepy and uncomfortable.
No, that's not okay.
Gross.
It's definitely a challenge, and I think it's one that really everybody is working through on some level. You know, I definitely, again, we don't need to get into the oppression Olympics or these types of things where we're trying to compare traumas, but I think that everybody, the people in the town that you're in who are espousing this kind of bullshit, the people who are out and proud and comfortable with themselves, the people who are everywhere else in the spectrum are in some way challenged by these types of thoughts, by the people around them, and as you said, internalized within themselves. And we're all kind of working through that. So I guess I just want to really validate where you're coming from, but also normalize it a little bit and let you know that this is something that people are working through and something that we're all making progress on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and we've got a pretty awesome community here on Discord, on Reddit, on Twitter. So if you ever need people to kind of have a soundboard and bounce off of, we're here for you too.
Thank you. That's sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate you giving us a call tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Take care. You know, it is a really prevalent thing, and I wonder how often queer folks, especially as they are maybe just coming into their identity, maybe just now starting to experience community, especially when you pair that with leaving the church and these different things.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people realize how common this is, how it's something that really everybody is struggling with on some level.
Yeah, especially if you can, because it sounds like he's kind of trying to pass right now in order to make his life a little bit easier, which is unfortunate but understandable.
Sure.
And it also, it is a very weird place to be in when you can pass and you are passing in a conversation and you hear these things being brought up. Most of my relationships have appeared, at least, even if we're both queer in some way, have appeared to be like pretty straight relationships. And so people would say things in front of me, in front of my partner, and we would just be like, well, I don't know what to do with this information because you're talking to people who you wouldn't be talking to otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up that hearing around me and sometimes repeating myself just really awful things about, gay people in particular. I don't think we had much of a concept of trans people in my community, which is, I think, part of why it took me so long to figure out that that was a thing that I could be. And I also had to figure out that, gender and sexuality operate independently from one another.
Right, that being trans isn't just like an extra weird version of being gay, which is how it was very much communicated to me at a young age.
I think as I got exposed to a little more things outside the strict evangelical community, I started to have some concept of what I would then have called a, transvestite in my head. And I'm not super femme, that. And I didn't really realize that I could also be attracted to men. I certainly wasn't exclusively attracted to men. So I didn't identify with that. I did identify with a lot of women, though. I did make good friendships with women and want to spend more time with those friends than with male friends in many cases. I mean, I had some good male friends too, like in high school and in college, but less in college. But yeah, I mean, I remember in middle school and high school saying things like, oh, they should just all have to go live on an island somewhere, talking about AIDS being God's punishment and this kind of stuff. And I do remember one moment in middle school where I was at a friend's house and we were just talking about girls and sex and stuff as you do. And we both masturbated while we were having this talk. And then I just felt extremely guilty about that. And I think way disproportionately guilty. And I think that's because there was something sort of homoerotic about that. Or, at the time I thought of myself as a weird boy, so, and I thought, that having any kind of intimate, sexual intimacy with another boy or a man would be like the worst thing anyone could possibly do, so I don't think that I consciously process that at the time, but I cried for like 45 minutes. But yeah, so in Russia, back to, that part of the conversation, that's when I stopped going to church, like entirely. I had not been going to church regularly for a long time, but I got confirmed Episcopalian in 2012 and like tried to stay that, to just kind of like have this cultural Christianity,
Right.
And in Moscow, the Anglican church was very far away. The subway station closest to it was still like a long hike to the church. And every Sunday I was like, that's a real schlep. I don't want to do that. Yeah. And then finally I was like, I guess I just really don't want to go to church anymore. And, it wasn't too long after that, I really came to understand that I was queer and that gender had something to do with it. And then to identify as a transgender woman. And the night that happened, so at that point I was, poly dating as a secondary partner, but she was the only person I was dating, this queer girl in Moscow, a Russian-American girl. I mean, she was born in Moscow. She grew up partly in America. She was back in Moscow. And we were, well, she used to tease me, like, why are so many of your friends lesbians? Why are, and I was like, well, that's not normal. And, like, lesbians are just who I get along with. Like, they're my people. So,
Right.
So we were watching this wonderful 1999 like lesbian cult classic with Natasha Lyonne, But I'm a Cheerleader. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's like a spoof of conversion therapy, but also a lesbian coming of age love story. And
RuPaul.
And RuPaul.
There you go.
It's a fantastic.
It's everything you need.
And it's on YouTube for free because everyone devalues lesbian culture.
More for us.
So we were watching that, and like I said something to her. I don't even remember what, because it was not important relative to what came next. But we turned and looked at each other. We had this like long eye contact, and she just said to me, "You are such a dyke." And I was like, it was weirdly profound. I had this like spiritual experience. I was like, holy shit, that's a thing. It's possible for me to be.
Interesting.
And so it was after that I really began exploring that. And I think not coincidentally, like when I finally had these revelations and I started learning more about myself, I stopped being afraid of hell, even though I'd stopped believing in it a long time prior to that.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting development. But I still wasn't super comfortable with my body or in my body, In grad school, for part of it, after I got divorced, I started picking up swing dance, and so that was fun. Like Lindy Hop, Charleston, Balboa.
I love that stuff. Yeah.
And I got to like higher intermediate, I would say. Probably could do some advanced stuff, but I struggled with the sense of space. Like on a crowded dance floor, it was a struggle for me not to like accidentally kick people. I've always struggled with space. I hate parallel parking. I'm really good with words because, like I said, as a little kid, like I just came to live in my head. I don't feel quite right. I don't know why. So I just observe everything. I become this little anthropologist. And, I've been on hormone replacement therapy for 3 months, exactly 3 months as of tomorrow. Wow. And it's only like in the last month that I'm starting to really feel more embodied and comfortable in my body, because that's what was missing. Like, I mean, you've probably seen, like, I've been posting like all these selfies of my boobs.
You should go follow her on Twitter, guys.
Just like super weird and immature. But, I mean, second puberty, it is kind of like being a teenager again in some ways, right? So I never wanted to show people my body before. Like, I still don't like everything about it. I wish I could lose some weight. I want to get into a good exercise routine now. And I think now, just to be healthy, and I think now that might be the time that I'll really be able to like stick to that, because after a period of like pretty bad depression, I'm getting some energy back and some excitement in my life. And I think it is because my body is starting to match how I feel. So I went from like, I was not even we went swimming a lot growing up, but in recent years I was like, I didn't even want to swim with my shirt off because I didn't like my body, or even just go swimming. Like I rarely did it, but it's so strange. All of a sudden I'm like, I'm growing breasts, like my body is doing this and I want to show them to everyone because it's awesome.
I love it. Yay, celebrating bodies. Oh, that's great. We have one more person on the line.
Yeah,
right now.
absolutely. If you'd like to talk to Miguel,
Yeah,
you can
let's
go ahead
jump
and
onto
on the
that.
phones. Hey, Miguel, what can we do for you?
Good evening.
Howdy.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
We are doing good. What can we help you with tonight?
I was listening and I was relating to a lot of you guys' topics, and I was wondering about one that seemed to be odd to me that I haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
But I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and over the last 5 years or so, I was starting with questioning, and then it just led to me being like, I'm out. This isn't making any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And part of leaving, I was finally able to celebrate holidays like everyone else. Do what everyone else sees as regular things. And they seem to have been so taboo to my religion that I sometimes start having, like I was in a Halloween shop getting a costume for my first Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was in there, I got nauseous, like as if I was sick to my stomach. And then once I was out drinking with some friends, and then the next day, very similar things.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that it was just, at first I thought I was just getting a cold. But then once I was looking through porn and came upon trans girls that were really cute. And then after, well, not even after, before I even could look at anything, I was getting itchy all over my body and nauseous again.
Sure.
And I was wondering if that's at all common or something that happens, or if it's just some weird thing where my body is.
Oh, it definitely happens. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking out this book called Pure by Linda K. Klein, because she also had sort of like extreme physical responses to things that had been taboo prior to her deconstruction. For her, it was specifically around sex, and she found that she wasn't the only person who had these symptoms. Like, every time that she tried to have sex, she would, end up crying and with, I think it was an eczema outbreak, and just, she couldn't do it, even though she now believed it was perfectly fine. It wasn't immoral. Yeah, it's what you've experienced there, trying to do something that was forbidden by the religion that you gave up, and feeling nausea or some extreme physical symptom like that. It's you're definitely not alone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the body does weird things when you're stressed out and when you have those strong emotional impulses. I remember when I was living in Ohio, just the living in Ohio gave me hives for like 4 months straight. I was going to doctors, I was like, I don't know what's happening to me, and nobody could figure it out. Moved away, it's fine now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the body does weird things.
Yeah. And it's just
oh no, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh no, it was just a little, it seemed like too much at once to be. And then also where I ended up moving to, I used to be in Miami, and now I'm in like northern New Mexico. And all of a sudden, I'd never felt before, but I'm like the outsider, one of a group of black guys in this town. And it is racism, but it's so veiled that it's just, everything has been so out of my element recently. And then you add on top of that, questioning the religion, becoming atheist and everything else. It just seems like it's a lot at once.
Yeah, it can do a lot to flood your nervous system. The things that you're experiencing make sense, They are common to an extent. And so I just want to let you know that these are not fun things to be going through. And we certainly, mourn for you and join with you in that. But I also want to let you know that you're not alone, that these are really typical experiences that you're having. They do tend to reduce with time. And they're also really, really receptive to different therapies and different types of treatment. So if this is something that you feel like is causing real issues on your life, I want to let you know it's very, very treatable. So there are some different ways to go about that, and it may be the type of thing that if you're taking care of yourself, if you are actively deconstructing some of these beliefs, eating right, sleeping well, living a healthy lifestyle, that it will naturally reduce on its own. But there are a lot of things that you can be doing to speed up that process or to take some control over it. So I just want to let you know and encourage you that this is something that you can handle and that will get better.
Let me add, if you can't sleep well, don't feel guilt about that, or don't blame yourself for that, because insomnia is one of the major symptoms of stress that I have. So I just want to throw that in there.
Right.
The body responds to stress. It sounds like what you're going through right now is very stressful. So it makes sense that that's playing out in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought B was saying something.
I wanted to echo what Chrissy said, that none of it is your fault. Like all of this, I know we tend to put moral weight on health and moral weight on being able to cope with things, and none of that has any moral bearing. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. So definitely don't take any of what's happening to you right now as anything that you are doing wrong.
A matter of your toughness, or grit, or any of those sorts of things. The way your body is reacting is very human.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because like all the things like that. Also, I don't remember when I slept well ever.
Sure.
But on top of all of that, I was seeing a therapist, and she was saying that I might have emotional trauma from just my very masculine, strict father. And everything just adding on top, and it makes sense in my mind, but it doesn't seem to be going much deeper than surface level conscious.
It just takes time for those things to sink in. And one of the most important steps is exposure. Having opportunities to, whether it's witnessing different types of porn or whether it's something a little bit more mild than that, just based on your comfort level. But being constantly exposed to, around, I know that for me, a big part of my deconversion process and just becoming comfortable with myself, my identity, and the world around me was listening to a lot of podcasts, frankly, like this one. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited to have the opportunity to be doing this show, because it was so meaningful to me to be just constantly exposed to these different ideas surrounding gender identity and sexuality and orientation and all of that. Because even if I knew it or understood it on some intellectual level, just by being around it, just by having that digital exposure, if not actually interacting with queer folks, still started that process of taking away some of that nausea, taking away some of that anxiety and some of that visceral reaction.
Right. Normalizing it in your own mind is going to help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And definitely the shows and the podcasts have helped a lot, especially since a lot of the expected and what seemed to be coming through just reactions of isolation that are coming from just leaving the religion and things like that, where it's good to have all of these different resources to hear, just of, like I was saying in the beginning when I was relating to a lot of what you guys were saying. It was just even a podcast I listened to a few days ago that I think B was talking about her history. You're talking about how you grew up, and it was really oddly similar to how I grew up with the homeschooling and their religion and everything else. It was like
it's a shitty club, but
yeah.
yeah, I feel you for sure. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah,
I hope we
thank
were
you.
able to kind of help a little bit and give you some perspective on that.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice night.
Take care.
Yeah, the body does weird things, again, when it's not allowed to be protected and it's not allowed to be celebrated, and you're kept in this box by a religious tradition. It's like, no, I have to pay attention to me.
Yeah, and it's not always reasonable, right?
Right,
I mean, you
exactly.
said it's weird things. We might recognize that pornography is meant to evoke this very visceral physical reaction, and so it might make sense that certain types of porn that go against the way you were raised could be really triggering, but it can be very strange things that you don't expect. I remember being like 19 years old and in the grocery store breaking out into hives and having some sort of what I thought was an allergic reaction and not knowing what it was. What I eventually worked out was that I was standing next to a bunch of fresh lilac, which I'm not allergic to, but when I was like 13 years old and learning how to shave, my dad was too lazy to actually teach me how or to give me like proper shave gel or anything, and instead just handed me a razor and told me to use the like lavender and lilac soap that was in the bathroom.
Oh, wow.
And so I did, and like some 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, I all of a sudden, right on my neck, where I had been covered in shave bumps because I was 13 and knew what the hell I was doing, I started to break out into some kind of weird rash. And it took...
The body remembers.
Right. It took so long to deconstruct and understand why the hell that was going on. And sometimes you'll never know. Sometimes you'll never be able to flash back to, holding a bloody razor in a bathroom and have that recollection. So... If
you want to hear a really weird example?
I know. I was really going for it.
Do you want to hear a really weird example? From
yes.
It's actually not about me, but on my first mission trip to Russia, so there were these old ladies from Ohio, speaking of Ohio, that came with us. It was mostly in our group, people from Indiana and Ohio and a few other places. So anyway, we were walking out on Red Square. We stayed in this hotel very close to Red Square. Weird thing about that hotel. It was very cheap for the location. It was very Soviet. You were definitely being spied on. And yes, you would get these phone calls. And like my roommate and I were like, who'd be calling us on the phone? So I picked up just because I'm like, well, what if they're like changing the meeting schedule or something? So I say, hello. And I hear, hello, I am beautiful girl. You want a massage? Sex massage? But anyway, that's not the story. And I said no. I said no, thank you. But we were walking out on Red Square, and all of a sudden, this old lady, she's looking around. She sees all the Cyrillic everywhere and the red stars on top of the Kremlin. Although, there's also now like Pepsi logos and whatever. There's stuff in the Latin alphabet. But nevertheless, she starts to feel really overwhelmed. She has some kind of physical episode. And she starts talking about how Russia was Gog or Magog, and she couldn't remember which one, but it was overwhelming because she was in this evil kingdom that was going to be the evil kingdom of the apocalypse, And her body had a reaction to that, and we had to help her walk back to the hotel and rest.
Wow, yeah.
Well, and these are the types of reactions that in an evangelical mindset you can begin to attribute to these spiritual or otherworldly things. Exactly. And it again just serves to cloud and confuse the relationships that we have with our bodies.
Right, because your body, we don't learn about our bodies and what they can do and what they will do if we don't pay attention to them. And so we think that everything we experience is spiritual because that's the lens that we're viewing the world through. Everything is spiritual and has either, again, a moral implication, whether it's good or bad, and you're going to feel that. And
which makes evangelicals really fear psychology.
Yeah,
honestly, for good reason, but it's terrible because it does terrible things to people that they often refuse to engage with proper modern psychological or psychiatric treatment for things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad told me that if I began to study psychology, that I would leave the church, and I thought, well, then I'll have to leave the church. Like, for me, it was about, if this is real, it should stand up to examination. And lo and behold, he was right.
Yeah.
But not in the way that he maybe thought.
Hey, people told me if I stopped believing, I'd be a gay witch.
Here we are.
Whoops.
Yeah, I really internalized that.
If that was an option for me, I think I would have jumped on it a little bit sooner, just to let you know. Nobody had mentioned that was something I could do.
That was one of the checkbox options you could choose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that sense of wanting to know the truth, and we were supposed to really care about the truth. You realize that, like, they all put a lot of limits on that. There are boundaries that you're not supposed to cross, and they're not really looking for the truth beyond a certain point.
Right.
But if you really internalize that, well, I don't want to believe things that aren't true, so I actually want to investigate this as much as possible. It takes you outside of that, unless you get sucked into presuppositionalist apologetics.
Right. Then that's a whole other ballgame.
After they've spent your whole life railing against relativism, they go for the ultimate relativism.
Yep.
They're like, well, everyone just brings different presuppositions to the same data, and it's sort of like, equally convincing if these are your assumptions or if these are your assumptions. There's no way to adjudicate between them, therefore we're right.
Yep, because that makes perfect sense. I feel like this ties really well into the hashtag Christian alt facts campaign that you launched. And especially how that impacts the LGBTQ people who are in those Christian schools and being homeschooled. Because I know that you said that the concept of being trans and the trans experience wasn't even a thing that you got taught. And so it took you a very long time to realize that. The same thing happened to me with both the bisexuality and the being non-binary. They were not talked about. The only time the word bisexual ever entered any conversation my entire life up until grad school was my mom saying, I don't care. I mean, I guess I don't care that much if you're gay or if you're straight, but bi people are just greedy. And that was the only thing. And to be clear, I love my mom. She doesn't necessarily think that about me, but that was it. That was all. And so it took a very long time to figure out who I was and how to be comfortable in my body. So can you talk a little bit about Christian alt facts and kind of maybe some through lines that you saw as people started sharing these stories?
Sure. So on that one, I mean, you do see a lot of stuff about just wacky Christian history, Christian nationalist history, science, quote unquote, textbooks. Like the Loch Ness Monster was real, and it proves that dinosaurs and man lived at the same time. Like a lot of the ridiculous creationist stuff that many of us learned growing up. But sometimes, yeah, I mean, it does also touch on, and there's probably even more of this underexposed Christian schools. The idea that homosexuality is a choice, or sexuality and gender identity are something that we can choose, or gender identity is not a thing. I mean, to the extent that that comes up in evangelical environments now, it's just to deny that it has a right to exist. And, some people are like, well, okay, there are intersex people, so God's a little weird, but, there's no such thing as being transgender or non-binary.
My goodness.
That's just nonsense.
Okay, so I had a conversation, and I'm not going to say with whom because I'm going to laugh very hard at this person's concept. I was asking them, because they were doing a paper on, I believe, intersex people or trans people. I forget exactly the focus that he was taking. But he was talking to me, and he was writing this paper for a Christian group, and he is also a Christian. And I was like, okay, well, here's a thread that explains the bimodality and the fact that it's not an either or situation when it comes to sex, and how everybody is kind of different, and trying to explain these things. And the takeaway that I got from him, which is his perspective, was there's no such thing as trans people. There are just intersex people, and intersex babies happen when you have sex outside of marriage and get STDs. If you have an STD, you will have an intersex child, and that's why it's bad. I'm like,
I'm sure the data backs that up.
If only we had some way of investigating
I was
this.
speechless. I was like, okay, I thought we were over here. We're over here. I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit and talk to you some more.
Yeah, that probably sounds like a lost cause.
Oh my God. It was very sad. It's like, how did what? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and these hashtags too, like
share.
the chick tracks come up, and like, I mean, some of them like made gay men in particular like the ultimate villains, like almost as bad as the Pope, which for Jack Chick was, like no one was as bad as the Pope.
Oh my God.
All these ideas of like they want to recruit you. It comes from childhood sex abuse or whatever, and these are the people who are abusing everybody. I mean, at least like it's happening a lot in their communities, most likely disproportionately, because these are very abusive communities and they cover up abuse. And so that's the kind of community where predators can thrive, so I'm pretty sure that like in conservative religious environments, sex abuse and other kinds of physical abuse are happening a lot more than in more open and liberal environments, and less hierarchical environments. But yeah, I mean, it's like all gay people are pedophiles and they were abused by pedophiles when they were kids, and that's why they became gay, and they abuse more kids to recruit them because they can't reproduce themselves. So obviously, like, there won't be any other gay people unless they can like satanically somehow, recruit children.
Yep. Science, guys, science.
Science and vampires.
Magnets, how do they work?
Yeah.
Gravity, is it a thing?
Are women people?
These are the only clips that are going to get clipped.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we have one more caller on the line that I'd love to get to super quick before we wrap things up a little bit. So if we want to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got just a moment to speak with Ash.
Hi, Ash.
Hi.
Hello. How are
What can we
you?
do for you tonight?
I'm pretty good. Hi, Christy, V. I hate to play favorites, but hello, V.
Hi.
Just figured I'd take a moment to let it be known that you made a really big influence on my life, particularly.
My
you,
goodness.
Matt Dillahunty, Don Baker, Tracy Harris, just all the ACA.
Oh my gosh.
Very good company.
Yeah, right? Oh, thank you so much. That means so much.
So, do you guys have anything down in the notes there?
Very brief. It says you were raised Mormon.
Okay, yeah. So basically my, I guess, dilemma in my thought process is I'm a recently out trans woman, and I was raised Mormon, and basically there's a dichotomy that, I've heard you say a number of times that even after you leave religion, there's still those things that stick with you,
Sure.
And one of them for me is either you are the patriarch, the alpha, the breadwinner, the whatever, or you are the sweet, submissive housewife who just stays at home and your only objective in life is to be a baby factory and give it up whenever your husband wants it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then document the family legacy.
Later, yeah. Yep. And that was just basically my question is, all these years later, I'm out of the church a good 5 years, but how do you shake those thoughts or it just...
So are you struggling with trying to fit into some of those roles, or, with not fitting in the roles that you feel like you should be fitting into, or what exactly is going on?
Basically, yeah. I know it's just cognitive dissonance, I guess, but I know that, the binary option of what kind of person you are is, just completely irrelevant. But it's still something, because I was taught so much as a child, it still sticks with me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can relate to this, but growing up and into adulthood, I mean, the expectations to fulfill masculine gender roles that I had were like really uncomfortable. And that didn't mean that I wanted to be like, go to the other side of the very patriarchal binary that we were taught, and like, not have a career or something like that. Although if there are any billionaires out there who want to marry me, I'm available. So yeah, it's, I think when you deconstruct from hardline toxic religion, and when you throw in something extra complicated like queerness on top of it, you got to take some time to figure out who you are. At least that's certainly been the case for me, and who you're comfortable being. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but for a long time, because of the kind of Christianity that I internalized growing up, I didn't really believe in self-love. I didn't think that we had to love ourselves in order to love others. I thought that was selfish. I was like, what are all these like pop culture people saying that you don't have to love yourself? We're supposed to treat others better than ourselves. And so there's a lot of self-erasure that goes on, I think, particularly for women. And, even those of us who maybe didn't even know we were women the whole time, but like we were definitely not internalizing things the way that a cis man would internalize them. So yeah, it's a lot to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to quite a bit of that, actually.
Like a lot of the things we've been talking about, exposure is going to be one of your best weapons in just becoming more comfortable in these different things. So one place I'd recommend maybe is actually the Mormon Lesbian podcast. That's available, I think, only on Apple Podcast. I could be wrong about that, but we'll actually be having them on air with us coming up this month. So I do want to mention that, just because the first couple of episodes really do look at specifically deconstructing Mormonism from a queer identity. And so I think that might be something that you could find some solace in. But beyond that, just having an opportunity to witness, to see, to participate in, to understand, and to just be around different types of family norms, different types of gender norms and identity styles.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, this is somewhat similar. I grew up not just in a religious household, but in an abusive one. And I had no idea that it was abusive until I started going to friends' houses in college and spending the week with another family and realizing, oh, there are different ways to do this. And that kind of exposure therapy of just spending time with people who interact in ways you're not used to, and kind of normalizing that in your own brain does wonders. It normalizes it. It gives you those new pathways to build, those new concepts to kind of build a foundation on. So if you have friends who you can kind of rely on for that, or even if you're looking online, there are a lot of amazing people on YouTube, present company not excluded, who are making their lifestyles known and being out and proud. And I think just doing that kind of research would be a great first step.
Absolutely.
And also take time. 5 years is a long time in some respects, but also not very long in other respects. And it seems like you're doing a whole lot of soul searching and a whole lot of deconstructing and putting yourself back together in a way that you want to be, and that's amazing. But also, cut yourself a little bit of slack. It's going to take a long time to really deconstruct everything, and that's not a bad thing. It just means that you're doing it in a healthy and introspective way.
I think
there's definitely no timetable or
about.
schedule for these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. You're not behind. You're not missing anything. You're taking your time and you're doing it responsibly, and that's great.
And as much as you're wanting to change these things about yourself, change these things about the way you view the world, there's also a lot of value in just accepting that this is where you're at right now, that these are the struggles that you're going through right now, and having compassion and patience for yourself as that changes.
Okay. Do y'all have time? Can I hit you with one more thing?
Real quick, we do want to make sure that we don't keep Chrissy too long. But if you, if
I don't have anywhere to go.
Yeah, real rapid fire if you can. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it kind of follows with my last issue, which was I was born and raised in the Mormon church.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, my mother wasn't present when I was growing up. And so my sister wound up being adopted to a very fundamentalist Mormon family. Like, you either go to BYU or you don't have an education, that kind of thing.
Right.
And my biggest fear in life is I know that she loves her brother, but because I was raised that way, I know what I was taught. I worry she's going to just, disown me as her family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's hard. And I'm dealing with something similar with a close family member. So there's no predicting how that's going to go. Unfortunately, these kinds of communities are predatory and destructive. And when you aren't able to fit into it, and sometimes, even if you became an atheist, maybe people wouldn't cut off contact. But if you're trans, it's a different matter. It's just, there's a lot of losses that come with these experiences. And that's shitty, and it shouldn't be that way. And I hope that we have a better world in the future where it will be less and less that way for people. But you grow up in a strict religious background and you're queer, there will be social consequences and psychological consequences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fair to say.
If you do want to talk more about this, we can either make sure that we hold a space for you next week, or you can email us at sex@atheist-community.org, or you can leave a voicemail at our new voice inbox at 512-666-0-ASK. It's 512-666-0275. And we can talk about that more in depth next week as well.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, that sounds wonderful. I'd love to talk to y'all again.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, looking forward to it. Thank you so much for calling in, and we'll look for your next message.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. Thank you guys for taking my call. Again, you've all been a huge help in forming myself. So
Glad to hear it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, she said again, we've all been a big help, V. So I don't want to hear any of this bullshit later. Just want to remind you, we were all helpful. We were all there. We all helped. Cool.
That reminds me, I owe my favorite old student an email, but also I don't have favorite students.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so as we wrap up, I just want to ask you one more question. And this is kind of a question that can be applied, hopefully, to the audience who's listening and to anybody who finds this video later. So we know that certain forms of Christianity and theism and religion are afraid of celebrating bodies, are afraid of accepting them for what they are, for the flawed, beautiful, crazy, confusing things that they are. And in light of that, how do we combat that? What is a good, healthy, positive way that we can take ownership of that and feel empowered?
That's a big question.
Yeah, 2 minutes, quick, come on, Chrissy.
I mean, if you've come from that kind of religious background, I think that the best thing that you can sort of do is just start getting comfortable with yourself. Maybe you've never explored your body in certain ways. Maybe there are still things that are taboos. Start just wherever you are and look for resources on this. Jamie Lee Finch does a lot of stuff about this, and in her book You Are Your Own, she focuses a lot on this, becoming embodied and coming back to our bodies and loving our bodies. So there are resources to look for, written specifically by people who have had body issues that are related to conservative Christianity. So yeah, that can be a good thing to do. But, nothing can guarantee that you're going to be free of some of these kinds of symptoms that we've been talking about today. Like a lot of, I mean, you're just going to have to work through some things, and it's shitty. And get therapy, get help as much as possible if you can, you know. But I mean, you talked about how, exposure in small quantities, at least, taking things one step at a time, helps us move through the traumas. And but there are also definitely lots of practices that people can do to become more comfortable with their bodies, like doing yoga or learning some kind of dance. I'm thinking of trying to go back to some kind of dance class now, maybe next year, maybe in the summer. I don't know. We'll see. But doing things for our bodies and really sort of concentrating on just how we feel, maybe learning meditation, really just sort of like trying to think about what every part of your body is telling you in a given moment, just concentrating on your sensations. I mean, they all kind of help situate you, bring you back into the present. Mindfulness techniques can help. So yeah, I mean, I don't feel like an expert on this. I feel like I'm really just kind of getting started, to be honest.
Yeah, well, this feels like a great time to remind folks about the Recovering from Religion Foundation, as well as their secular therapy project. We, of course, have been partnering with them for a long time, but they do really excellent work, and at the very least can be a great place to start. So if you're hearing all of this and thinking, damn, I do have a lot of deconstructing to do, and it feels overwhelming, I think that's a really great place to jump in.
Yeah, FFRF? No, that's the wrong one. RFR? They're all R's and
Google
F's.
Recovering from Religion.
Too many R's and F's in this.
Recoveringfromreligion.org, I believe.
Yeah, they do have a good list. You know, for my part, I was able to get some good, helpful therapy in the past when I was a grad student and I had access to it for free. And I need to start getting into therapy now. And in the past, I mean, it was a lot about my head, but the body stuff, I mean, I think the hormones are helping a lot, but I could also be more intentional about it.
Well, the thing is, you are your body. You know, we're taught that there's this duality, that there's a brain and there's a body and there's a soul and there's a spirit, and
your body is not a robot that your brain drives.
Right, your brain is part of your body, and your body affects your brain, and it's all you. That's
my favorite part of the Concords routine, though. You know, when they're in the robot costumes, the humans are dead. It's pretty great.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're going to close out, but Chrissy, do you want to pitch your book one more time and let people know where they can find it?
Sure, thanks. So the book is Empty. Some that look at the global reach of kind of American right-wing Christianity. We drew on a very talented pool of people for this book, including people like Liz Linz and Maud Newton and Linda Tirado, and Carmen Maria Machado, Juliana Delgado Lopera, and many more. So it's I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I know that Lauren is as well. We're excited to get it out there on the market. And yeah, you can find it pretty much anywhere that books are sold. We certainly encourage you, if you do this sort of thing, to go to your local brick and mortar bookstore and have them order it, but you can buy it on Amazon. Something happened on Amazon's end that was all screwy with the Kindle edition, so I hope that's been resolved or will be resolved very soon. But it's available in Kindle, and it will be available to be bought in Kindle again soon. There was just some kind of glitch there.
Yeah, KDP is working out some kinks right now. Another thing you could do is go to your library and ask them to order a few copies, because that always makes publishers really happy.
Yes, that would be great. and this is published with a small press. They've been really wonderful. Epiphany Publishers, based in Indianapolis. But, with a small press, they don't always get ordered by the libraries. And I mean, I'm not sure anything always gets ordered by the libraries anymore, with the exception of a very few books by household names. So, yeah, get out there and ask the library. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chrissy. You can find Chrissy on Twitter at C_Stroop. And then your website is cstroop.com. Anywhere else that you want to direct people?
I've been on Instagram for a little while, at Chrissy Stroop. So I don't have a huge following yet there or anything, and I use it inconsistently, but there are more uncensored selfies there.
Oh, fun. Go check them out.
Until possibly my account
with that.
Well, they took one of them down. I keep waiting to see if they're going to flag some of the other ones and maybe kick me off of Instagram. But like, I can risk my Instagram account because it's new, but I can't risk my Twitter account.
There you go. Although you can get away with a lot more on Twitter. Okay, and then
some people.
And then if you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at Secular Sex. And if you do want to leave us a voicemail so that we can, we're going to be pre-recording a couple of the holiday episodes. And so we will be answering all of the voicemails and all the emails that we get from you guys. And if you'd like to participate in that process, again, our inbox number is 512-666-0ASK. That's 512-666-0275. And
yeah, beyond that, I just want to thank everybody who watched live, and let anybody who isn't watching live know that there's an incredible chat going on right here on YouTube as well as in the Discord channel. Those are a lot of fun. So if you do listen to the podcast later, but find yourself with an opportunity on a Thursday night to join us live, it's really a great time. Also, after this, we're going to be jumping into that Discord channel and doing just a little bit of meet and greet. So if you are watching live, please go ahead and jump in. We would love to talk to you a little bit more directly.
Yeah, about anything and everything. All right. Thank you again. Oh, Crew Cam. Yay!
Yeah!
Thank you, Crew Cam.
Our talented theme.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show, Chrissy. And I look forward to continue to stalk you.
Oh, come on anytime.
Perfect. Well, write that next book and we'll have you back on.
Oh shit, that's going to take a couple of years. I thought you liked me.
Oh, we'll be communicating. I just don't want to share you with anybody else. All right.
Well, with that, I suppose it's time to wrap it up as we're getting a little bit late. Thank everybody for joining us tonight. Please jump in the Discord if you can. And if not, then just go ahead and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.